Alex stared at the screen, disbelief freezing him in place. The rent payment had failed. Again, the balance blinking back at him wasn't just lit, was zero. It's not a single dollar to cover the apartment he'd called home for years. Notifications poured in like an avalanche, past due bills, declined transactions, overdraft alerts. Each ding felt like a hammer striking his chest. He thought he had a handle on things. After all, he worked hard, stayed late at the office, and spent evenings juggling side gigs. But now, all of it felt meaningless. The weight of ignorance pressed down heavier than any financial advisor's lecture could have. This wasn't just a failed payment, it was a mirror reflecting years of neglect, of assumptions, of I'll deal with it later moments. Alex's mind raced, calculating every recent expense, that car repair he'd put on a credit card, the surprise medical bill, the streaming subscriptions he thought were harmless. Every choice, every small convenience, now looked like a misstep stacked on top of another. Building a mountain, he had no idea how to climb. Panic turned to dread. Realized he didn't just lack money, he lacked understanding. Didn't know where it went, how to control it, or how to make it grow. The apartment phone rang. It was the landlord, polite but firm. The payment was overdue, and late fees were accumulating. Alex's voice caught in his throat, fumbling for excuses that sounded hollow even to himself. Every word felt like an admission not just of financial strain, but of vulnerability. This was humiliation in real time. He sank into the worn sofa, staring at the blinking cursor of his empty bank account. Fear crept in, not fear of numbers, but fear of life unraveling in slow motion. Because money wasn't just a tool, it had become a measure of worth, security, and freedom. And Alex had none. In that suffocating silence, he understood the harsh truth. This was more than a missed rent payment. It was a consequence of ignorance, of a financial life lived on autopilot. The panic, the shame, the uncertainty was only the beginning. But the reality was, Alex had never truly understood money and that ignorance would cost more than just bills. Before the alarms, the overdraft alerts, and the sinking realization that his financial life was crumbling, Alex's world had seemed deceptively normal. He woke up each morning to the familiar hum of his alarm, coffee brewing, and the commute to a job that, for all its stability, offered little excitement and even less financial education. Paychecks arrived on schedule, bills were managed, and yet beneath the surface, chaos quietly accumulated. Alex had dreams like anyone else. Small apartment in the city, the freedom to travel without checking account balances, maybe even a house someday. But those dreams were always just out of reach. He spent as he pleased. Takeout dinners after long days, weekend gadgets he didn't need, subscriptions he barely used. It wasn't reckless spending in the obvious sense. It was a subtle, creeping financial negligence. He had convinced himself he was responsible. After all, he never bounced checks. He didn't rack up massive credit card debt. Or at least, he told himself that his friends envied him for his apparent stability. They didn't know about the hidden juggling act. Late payments postponed with minimum amounts, small loans taken to cover shortfalls, credit cards maxed out quietly under the radar. Alex wore a mask of control, presenting the illusion of financial competence, while the truth simmered beneath. He didn't lack ambition, he lacked literacy. And in the world of money, ignorance is expensive. Every month was a delicate balancing act. Bills, rent, utilities, groceries age category, a puzzle piece that never quite fit. He thought he understood interest, or at least enough to avoid obvious traps. But terms like compound growth, emergency funds, and inflation were abstract. Concepts relegated to casual articles he skimmed while scrolling late at night. He hadn't realized those lessons were the difference between surviving and suffocating financially. Even his work environment reinforced a false sense of security. Colleagues celebrated raises and bonuses. The company offered retirement plans. And yet nobody talked about strategy, budgeting, or wealth creation. Alex absorbed the culture of complacency without questioning it. Money was a background noise, a part of life, but never a force to be mastered. Until now, when the alarms rang, and every unnoticed choice came to confront him at once. He reflected on his past decisions. Small missteps that had compounded over time. Loans for luxuries, impulse purchases, and the silent assumption that income would always increase faster than expenses. In retrospect, the signs had been there, but hindsight offered no comfort in the face of an empty bank balance. He had been financially blind, unaware of the systemic pressures and pitfalls that awaited anyone unprepared in the modern economy. Yet, there was one thing about Alex that hadn't changed. He still cared. He still wanted to fix it, to climb out of the invisible pit he had fallen into. He just didn't know how. And in that uncertainty lay the seed of something more powerful than fear. The potential for transformation. He didn't know this would be the last stable day of his life. The final illusion of normalcy before the storm of consequences began. The days ahead would strip him bare, expose every misconception, and force him to confront money in its rawest form. And it all started with one harsh, unignorable lesson. Stability was an illusion. And ignorance had a price. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It arrived quietly, like a shadow creeping across a sunlit room until it consumed everything Alex thought he understood about money. It started with the rent, the alarm that jolted him awake, but the cracks had been forming. For months, invisible yet unavoidable. One misstep compounded another: late credit card payments, overdraft fees, and a small personal loan that now demanded more than he could comfortably manage. The mountain of obligations grew taller, and Alex stood at the base, unprepared for the avalanche. The phone calls began in the morning. First, the landlord, polite but unyielding, reminding him of the overdue rent. Then the utility companies, each with their own script of warnings and consequences. Then, an automated message from the bank, coldly notifying him that his account had dipped below the allowed threshold. The sense of panic escalated with every ring. He wasn't just behind on money, he was behind on life itself. He tried to patch things together. Borrowing from friends, paying one bill while another ballooned, juggling priorities like a performer on a tightrope. But the rope snapped when he received a final notice from a credit card company. Interest had spiked due to a missed payment, and suddenly, the debt that had seemed manageable was uncontainable. Alex felt the sting of every decision he had ever made that ignored the power of compounding, not the kind that builds wealth, but the kind that builds relentless obligation. Bills weren't the only problem. A car accident left him with unexpected repair costs. Medical bills arrived for a minor procedure that insurance barely covered. Each expense felt like another weight pressing down, and Alex realized he had been walking a financial tightrope without a net. His life had become a series of short-term fixes, temporary patches applied to a structure that was inherently unstable. And yet, the most crushing revelation wasn't external. It was the understanding that he had no contingency plan, no emergency fund, no knowledge of credit management, no awareness of investment or asset protection. His education hadn't prepared him for real financial crises. His parents had never spoken about money beyond save a little, spend a little. Schools didn't teach it. Society glossed over it. And now, ignorance wasn't just a flaw, it was a threat, as he sat in his apartment, surrounded by overdue notices and the silent hum of appliances he could no longer afford to use without worry. Alex faced the truth. He had been defeated not by circumstance, but by his own lack of understanding. The weight of failure wasn't just financially, it was emotional, existential. Every alarm, every notification, every letter from a creditor screamed the same lesson. Knowledge is power, and he had none. Late nights became a ritual. He pored over spreadsheets he barely understood, online forums promising solutions, and financial articles that seemed written in another language. The anxiety was relentless. Sleep became a currency he couldn't afford. Meals were skipped to cover the essentials. Social life evaporated. Every aspect of his existence narrowed to one singular, suffocating obsession: survival. But beneath the despair, a different kind of tension emerged. Amid the chaos, a spark of realization began to take hold. What had seemed like a final, irreversible collapse was, in reality, a brutal education. Alex had hit rock bottom, but rock bottom offered clarity. He could see the patterns, the mistakes, the systemic traps. He could also see the path forward if he learned, if he disciplined himself. If he confronted the reality he had ignored for so long, the collapse had stripped him of illusion, exposing the raw mechanics of financial survival. It was painful, humiliating, and terrifying. But it was also the first moment Alex truly understood money not as a distant abstraction, but as a force with rules, consequences, and opportunity. What looked like financial death was only the beginning. Alex sat in the darkness of his apartment, the glow of his laptop screen the only light in the room. The numbers stared back at him like unrelenting judges. Every debt, every missed payment, every forgotten deadline converged into a single, oppressive. Wait, he hadn't just lost control of money, he had lost control of his life. Friends avoided his calls. Family offered advice that felt like criticism. Every interaction reminded him of his failures, his ignorance, his vulnerability. He was isolated, overwhelmed, and desperate. The emotional toll was suffocating. Anxiety gnawed at him, turning every simple decision into a monumental challenge. Sleep became impossible. He would lie awake, haunted by questions he had never considered. How did he get here? Could he ever fix this? Would he ever feel safe again? The fear wasn't abstract. It was tangible. It wrapped around him in waves, leaving him gasping, paralyzed. Doubting every choice he had ever made, the financial missteps were endless. But their consequences now took on a personal dimension. Late fees multiplied like predators circling prey. Interest grew faster than he could pay. Creditors began aggressive collection tactics, each call a reminder of how precarious his life had become. The apartment, once a place of comfort, felt like a prison. Every unopened bill was a threat, every email a potential disaster. Alex felt trapped in a cycle he had no tools to escape. It wasn't just the money, it was the mindset. For years he had ignored the lessons, convinced he could manage with instinct, luck, or sheer effort. Now, reality was unforgiving. Financial ignorance had consequences far beyond embarrassment, shaped relationships, eroded confidence, and threatened every aspiration he had held. Every corner of his life seemed infiltrated by the repercussions of choices he didn't fully understand. In the midst of despair, Alex wrestled with shame. He replayed moments he wished he could undo. Impulsive purchases, skipped budgets, loans he thought he could manage, advice he ignored. Each memory was a sting, reinforcing the narrative that he was inadequate, unprepared, and destined to repeat the same mistakes. Even basic concepts like how interest accumulates, the importance of liquidity, or the power of an emergency fund suddenly felt like foreign language. He should have mastered years ago. Days blurred into nights as he grappled with the enormity of it all. Social interactions felt shallow. Colleagues celebrated milestones he could barely afford to imagine. Every success he witnessed in others was a silent indictment of his own failures. He tried to distract himself with work, with minor tasks, but the financial reality always returned, relentless and unyielding. And yet, beneath the crushing weight of fear and shame, a quiet tension simmered. Alex had hit the absolute lowest point, the depth of despair where surrender seemed almost inevitable. But in that dark place, clarity began to emerge. For the first time, he could see the stakes with brutal honesty. The problem wasn't luck. The economy, or circumstance alone, was knowledge, or rather, the lack of it. The power had always been in understanding money, and now, finally, the truth was unavoidable. Sacrifice became tangible. Meals skipped, late nights studying financial blogs, endlessly comparing repayment strategies. Every action was painful, every step forward deliberate. Alex confronted his fear, naming it, acknowledging it, letting it push him rather than paralyze him. The despair that had once suffocated him became a teacher, forcing him to confront the harsh mechanics of money, until one decision changed. I saw money forever. The first small step felt almost insignificant, Alex had spent weeks staring at spreadsheets, reading articles, and watching financial videos. But that night, he decided to act. He opened a notebook and wrote down every expense he could remember, every dollar owed, and every source of income. The numbers, once terrifying and chaotic, began to form a picture he could understand. For the first time, he saw his money not as an enemy, but as a tool, messy, limited, but actionable. He started with the basics: budgeting, allocating funds for essentials first, prioritizing debt repayment, and setting aside a small portion. For emergencies, it was painful at first. He canceled subscriptions, skipped nights out, and packed lunches instead of ordering takeout. Every choice was a reminder of past negligence, but also a testament to new discipline. Slowly, the panic began to ebb. He felt the first real sense of control he had known in months. Next came the discovery of saving and emergency funds. Alex learned the hard way that life is unpredictable, that accidents and sudden expenses are inevitable. Setting aside even a tiny buffer felt revolutionary. The first $50 he managed to save became a symbol, a psychological turning point. It wasn't wealth, but it was security. For the first time in years, he slept without a pit of dread in his stomach, knowing there was a cushion, however small. Between him and complete financial collapse, investing, a concept he had once dismissed as something for the wealthy or the lucky, began to make sense. He realized that even modest amounts placed wisely could grow over time, learned about compound interest, risk versus reward, and the importance of starting early. Each small action: researching a mutual fund, understanding how credit scores worked, opening a micro-investment account, felt like reclaiming a piece of his life. Knowledge became power, and action became liberation. But it wasn't just numbers, it was mindset. Alex discovered that discipline, patience, and consistency were as crucial as any financial formula. Learned to delay gratification, to question impulsive spending, and to see money as a reflection of choices rather than a reflection of self-worth. Each step built confidence. Each small victory reinforced a growing belief that he could not only survive, but thrive. The victories were incremental, but visible. The first bill paid on time without borrowing. The first credit card balance reduced by more than the minimum. The first saved paycheck that wasn't immediately eaten by unforeseen costs. Each success fueled momentum. Alex realized that the collapse had been a painful but necessary teacher, forcing him to confront the gaps in his understanding and forcing action where hesitation had ruled before. Mentorship and resources played a role as well. Online communities, financial podcasts, and even one trusted colleague who had navigated similar struggles offered insights Alex could apply. He realized that financial literacy isn't just personal, it's social. Learning from others, observing best practices, and applying lessons in real time accelerated his growth. The network of knowledge became a lifeline. By the time he logged off that night, a sense of hope had returned. Alex understood that he couldn't undo the past, but he could reshape the future. The power of small, deliberate actions began to feel tangible. The panic, the shame, and the helplessness hadn't disappeared. But they had a counterweight now: competence, strategy, and vision. This turning point wasn't about sudden wealth or miraculous success. It was about reclaiming agency. The first small wins marked the beginning of a new chapter. Alex had discovered that money could be understood, managed, and leveraged. What once seemed like an insurmountable enemy was now a puzzle to solve, a challenge to master, and, eventually, a vehicle for freedom. Then the world noticed. Once Alex began applying the principles he had painstakingly learned, the world around him slowly started to shift. The first victories, small and almost imperceptible at the start, created momentum. Bills were paid on time. Credit card balances steadily declined. The emergency fund, once a tiny buffer, began to grow, offering not just security, but confidence. Every dollar allocated thoughtfully felt like reclaiming control over a life that had once seemed unmanageable. He began to see patterns that had eluded him before. Income alone wasn't the solution. It was how money was managed that determined stability. Budgeting wasn't restrictive. It was liberating. Savings weren't sacrifices. They were investments in his freedom. Debt wasn't shame, it was a strategic obstacle to be overcome with discipline. Alex's understanding transformed the way he approached every financial decision, turning anxiety into calculated action. With newfound clarity, he tackled higher-level concepts. Credit scores became not just a number, but a tool to unlock opportunity. He learned to optimize payments and strategically reduce debt in ways that minimized interest. Investing was no longer abstract. Stocks, bonds, and index funds became instruments he could use to grow wealth over time. He diversified carefully, understanding risk and reward in practical, measurable terms. Every decision was intentional, a deliberate move toward long-term security rather than short-term satisfaction. Momentum began to compound. Where Alex had once felt trapped by scarcity, he now saw leverage. Side projects started generating extra income, not as frantic attempts to survive, but as calculated ventures aligned with his skills and interests. Networking offered insights, partnerships, and opportunities he had ignored before. Each success built credibility, confidence, and, most importantly, proof that consistent action created tangible results. The psychological shift was profound. Money no longer controlled him. The panic that had defined his lowest points was replaced with foresight and planning. He approached negotiations, purchases, and investments with measured strategy rather than fear-driven impulse. Friends began to notice the change not just in his finances, but in his demeanor. He spoke with authority about money. No longer embarrassed, no longer apologetic. Alex had transformed. Ignorance into mastery, despair into action, even setbacks, once catastrophic, now felt manageable. A delayed payment or a minor market dip was no longer a spiral into panic, but a challenge to analyze and overcome. Alex had learned that financial literacy wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about resilience, adaptability, and preparation. Every misstep became a lesson. Every challenge an opportunity to reinforce his systems and improve decision-making. By this stage, his financial life had structure. Clear budget, automated savings, diversified investments, and an emergency fund created a safety net. Strategic side projects supplemented income. Credit was managed to maximize opportunities, not just avoid penalties. Alex had not only survived the collapse, he was thriving in ways he had never imagined. Each month brought measurable progress, and with it, an emotional reward far greater than any paycheck. The security of knowledge, the power of control, and the confidence that his decisions now shaped his future. But the most critical transformation was internal. Alex had learned that wealth was not simply accumulation, it was discipline, patience, and vision applied consistently. It was about seeing money as a tool, not a goal, a means, not an end. The lessons learned from hardship became a blueprint for sustained growth, not fleeting gain. As he reviewed his finances one evening, a quiet satisfaction settled over him. He could see how far he had come from panic and helplessness to stability and opportunity. But despite the victories, a lingering awareness remained. The greatest lesson was yet to be fully understood, one that transcended numbers, spreadsheets, and investments. But the biggest lesson wasn't about money. Years had passed since the chaos of unpaid bills, mounting debt, and sleepless nights. Alex now sat in a sunlit apartment that felt like a sanctuary rather than a trap. The financial turmoil that once defined his existence had become a distant memory, replaced by structure, clarity, and control. The lessons learned in those desperate months had matured into habits that governed not just his finances, but his mindset and life choices. The transformation wasn't just numerical. The emotional weight of uncertainty, fear, and shame had lifted, replaced by confidence and stability. Alex could make decisions without panic. He could negotiate contracts, evaluate investments, and manage risk with foresight rather than reaction. He had built not only savings and investments, but a sense of security that permeated every aspect of his life. Money was no longer a source of anxiety, it was a tool wielded intelligently and intentionally. His relationships changed too. The shame and embarrassment that had once kept him isolated evaporated as he shared his journey with trusted friends and family. He became a resource, someone others turned to for advice, someone whose experiences provided tangible proof that financial literacy could transform lives. The social validation wasn't about bragging, it was about demonstrating that discipline. Knowledge and action could create real, measurable outcomes. People who had once envied him for superficial stability now looked to him for insight, strategy, and guidance. Alex also used his experience to build resilience. He knew the fragility of fortune and the unpredictability of life. Emergency funds, diversified investments, and contingency plans were no longer abstract concepts. They were concrete safeguards against the uncertainties that once terrified him. He approached business opportunities and career decisions with calculated caution, balancing ambition with prudence. Every choice was informed by lessons learned the hard way, but applied with precision and patience. Financial independence brought freedom. Alex no longer measured life by scarcity or limitations, but by opportunity. Travel, hobbies, and personal projects became accessible, not indulgent, because they were supported by a foundation of planning and foresight. The pressure to live paycheck to paycheck had vanished, replaced by the autonomy to make meaningful choices without fear. The emotional reward of financial literacy was now inseparable from the material reward. Yet, perhaps the most profound change was in his perspective. Money was no longer an end goal, but a mirror reflecting his discipline, patience, and strategic thinking. The lessons from collapse to competence had forged an understanding that wealth is temporary without knowledge, and freedom is meaningless without control. Alex could see how easily ignorance could erode stability, how quickly small missteps could compound into crises, and how crucial it was to respect the rules and principles that governed financial life. And so, in the calm that followed years of struggle, Alex reflected on his journey. He had faced panic, despair, and humiliation. He'd clawed his way back through discipline, learning, and relentless application of basic financial principles. He had transformed fear into strategy, ignorance into mastery, and instability into opportunity. And that's when he understood the truth.